December 3, 1944. Deep in the snowbound forests of Thuringia, Germany, a storm raged across the landscape. The wind cut through the skeletal trees like blades, and the relentless snow painted the world in shades of white and gray. Yet inside a hidden facility carved into the side of a mountain, the air burned with electricity. Not from the storm outside, but from the experiments within. Here, engineers and soldiers labored under flickering lights, shadows dancing across walls lined with cables, coils, and massive generators. This was the heart of Project Blitzpanzer, the Lightning Tank Project, a secret weapon that, if it could be controlled, might turn the tide of a war that Germany was rapidly losing. Oberstleutnant Heinrich Vogt, a grizzled veteran of both the Eastern Front and the Reich's experimental weapon divisions, stepped carefully along the narrow catwalks. His boots echoed in the cavernous hangar, a sound swallowed quickly by the hum of electrical currents. Vogt was a man who had seen the blood and fire of countless battles, yet the sight before him made him pause. On the platform below rested the prototype, a tank unlike any he had ever encountered. The vehicle's frame was sleek, angular, and armored with layers of experimental alloys that shimmered faintly in the dim light. At first glance, it resembled a standard Panzer IV, but closer inspection revealed a network of copper coils snaking across its hull, veins of energy conduits pulsating faintly, like a heart trying to wake from a long sleep. Towering above the main body was a rotating turret, not for a conventional gun, but housing a massive arc generator capable of discharging immense electrical currents into both the ground and enemy machinery. Dr. Matthias Engel, the lead engineer, adjusted his goggles as he worked on the control panel. Sweat glistened on his brow despite the freezing temperature. "Oberstleutnant," he said, his voice tight with excitement and fear, "we've never seen anything like it. The prototype can deliver over 2 million volts of direct energy. Not only can it disable enemy tanks, but it can short circuits, demolish vehicles, even disrupt communications lines across miles. But it is temperamental, unstable." "Unstable how?" he asked, his voice low, almost drowned by the hum of the generators. Engel swallowed, his hands trembling. "If the core overloads, the electrical discharge could tear through the hull, kill the crew. Or worse, we could lose the tank entirely, along with the surrounding facility. The energy flows are unpredictable. We've seen sparks leap 15 meters in uncontrolled bursts." The tank itself seemed to respond to their words, a low vibration thrumming through its armored shell, as if the machine had a life of its own, an awareness of the men who watched it with a mixture of reverence and terror. Soldiers stationed around the hangar murmured nervously. Some had volunteered for the project, others had been drafted into it. All had one thought in common: survival seemed as uncertain as the very physics governing this beast. Captain Otto Reiner, a young officer assigned to the project, leaned over a technician adjusting the energy regulators. "Do we even know how it moves at full power?" he asked, his voice betraying both curiosity and dread. Engel shook his head. "The propulsion is standard, diesel hybrid, but the integration with the arc generator is unprecedented. It draws kinetic feedback from the discharge, enhancing speed slightly, but no one knows the limits. The first test run may be enlightening or catastrophic." Vogt's sharp eyes scanned the hangar. Cables snaked across the floor, arcs of electricity jumping unpredictably, leaving scorch marks on steel plates. The air smelled of ozone and burning insulation. "We cannot afford a failure," he said, his voice tight, almost a growl. "The Eastern Front collapses every day. Hitler demands results. If this tank works, if we can control it, it could destroy entire Soviet convoys in seconds. Entire battalions could be disabled before they even reach the front." Engel nodded, though his face was pale. "Yes, Oberstleutnant, but every simulation we've run has shown instability. At high voltages, the electrical field interacts with the tank's own systems unpredictably. Even minor atmospheric changes can trigger a feedback loop." A heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the reinforced steel doors. Inside, men held their breaths, waiting for the moment when theory would meet reality. Vogt knew what would happen next. They would fire it. They would see whether the lightning tank was a tool of salvation or a herald of destruction. By mid-afternoon, the hangar doors were opened slightly to allow the tank access to a cleared test course. Snow crunched beneath the tracks as engineers and soldiers positioned themselves behind reinforced steel barricades. Vogt gave a curt nod. Initiate power-up. Engel's hands moved with precision, flicking switches and adjusting voltage regulators. The hum in the hangar deepened, transforming into a low roar as currents surged through the tank's body. Sparks began to dance along the coils, leaping from copper to steel with violent, beautiful arcs. The air thickened with ionized particles, making the hair on every arm stand on end. Even Vogt, a man hardened by years of combat, felt a shiver crawl up his spine. Then, with a sudden crack, the generator engaged fully. A lightning bolt arced from the turret into the metal floor, sending a shower of sparks into the air. Soldiers stumbled back instinctively, ears ringing from the sudden electrical discharge. The tank rumbled, its tracks vibrating as it moved with startling speed. Snow sprayed around it, melting instantly where sparks touched the ground. Otto Reiner watched in awe, his mouth slightly open. It's alive," he whispered, almost reverently. Vogt's voice was sharper. "Keep it steady. Focus on the course." The tank surged ahead, the arc generator producing a blinding display of raw energy. A test vehicle positioned as a target 50 meters away was enveloped in an invisible field. Within seconds, the tires melted, engines fried, and the metal frame twisted and bent from the electrical overload. Smoke rose, acrid and choking, but the lightning tank moved on, unscathed, like a predator that had just struck. But then, something went wrong. A miscalculation in the regulators caused the energy feedback to spike. Sparks lanced across the hangar floor, reaching distances no one had predicted. Engel shouted warnings, but the tank did not respond as expected. The electrical discharge jumped erratically, scorching the snow, cracking nearby steel barricades. Soldiers dived for cover, cursing, screaming, and praying in equal measure. Vogt ran forward, hand on his sidearm, heart hammering. "Engel, shut it down, now!" Engel's hands moved frantically, sweat dripping into his eyes, but the tank seemed almost sentient, resisting their commands. A massive arc leapt from the turret directly into the ground, vaporizing the snow in a crater over 3 meters wide. The roar of electrical energy was deafening. Even the walls of the hangar shook. Minutes, or perhaps seconds, passed like hours. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the surge stopped. Silence fell, thick and unnatural. The tank's lights dimmed, its body vibrating softly like a resting animal. The men stared at it, breathing heavily, eyes wide with disbelief. The lightning tank had survived, but the test had left its mark. Scorched floors, singed uniforms, frayed nerves, and a stark realization: this was no longer just a weapon. It was a force that refused to be tamed, a living storm in armored form. Volz met his gaze. "We can control it, but only barely. Every test brings it closer to killing us as much as it kills the enemy." Engel nodded slowly. "It is magnificent, terrifying, and I fear what will happen if someone less disciplined were to command it." Outside, the snowstorm raged on, blanketing the forest in a shroud of white. The lightning tank rested silently in the clearing. A storm, contained in steel and electricity, waiting for the day it would march into battle, and perhaps rewrite the rules of war itself. Vogt knew one thing for certain: the Allies would never anticipate what was coming. But he also knew that no human mind could ever fully predict the fury of a machine powered by lightning and madness. And somewhere deep in the frozen forests of Thuringia, the storm waited, silent, alive, and hungry. January 18, 1945. The winter had deepened, and Thuringia was buried under nearly a meter of snow. The forests were silent, save for the distant rumble of artillery from the collapsing Eastern Front. The Reich's desperation was tangible. Every new weapon project, every secret experiment was no longer about strategy. It was about survival. Project Blitzpanzer had progressed beyond theory. The Lightning tank had survived multiple indoor and outdoor tests, each more dangerous than the last. Now the question remained, could it survive the chaos of real combat? Oberstleutnant Heinrich Vogt stood at the edge of the clearing, snow whipping around his coat. Soldiers and engineers moved like ghosts around the Lightning tank, securing cables, checking regulators, and muttering prayers to themselves. Captain Otto Reiner joined him, face pale from frostbite and tension. "They want it in the field tomorrow," Reiner said, voice low. "Berlin is demanding results. No more tests, no more delays." Vogt's eyes never left the tank. "We barely understand it. The feedback loops are still unpredictable. One wrong spark, one miscalculated voltage, and—" He let the thought hang in the icy air. The men around them did not need words. They had all seen what a misfire could do. Dr. Matthias Engel approached, clutching his leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with equations, diagrams, and notes scribbled in frantic handwriting. "We can minimize the risk," he said, almost pleading. "If the crew follows the procedure exactly, no improvisation, the tank should operate as intended. But there is no guarantee at all." Vogt nodded grimly. "Then we proceed. It is the Reich's last hope. Prepare the crew." The crew consisted of 3 men, all trained rigorously in the weeks since the prototype was completed. Lieutenant Karl Bauer, the driver, had hands like steel and nerves like ice. Gunner Fritz Hohlmann had spent years on artillery, yet even he seemed awed by the tank's destructive potential. Engineer Otto Kruger, a man who had worked on the prototype from the beginning, would remain in the tank, monitoring systems in real time. They climbed aboard with precise, almost ritualistic movements, understanding that every second, every touch, could mean life or death. At dawn, the Lightning tank rolled out of the mountain facility, its tracks carving deep trenches in the snow. The men stationed along the test course held their breath as arcs of electricity leapt from the turret, crackling softly in the frozen air. A storm seemed to follow the tank wherever it went, as if the machine carried its own atmosphere, charged and alive. The first target was a mock Soviet convoy, abandoned vehicles left to simulate enemy formations. As the tank approached, a low hum filled the forest. Then, with no warning, a massive electrical discharge leapt from the turret. Engines exploded silently, tires melted, and metal frames twisted as if struck by lightning itself. Snow vaporized instantly where arcs struck the ground. Soldiers watching from a distance felt the hair on their arms stand on end, a static charge building in the air. But then disaster nearly struck. A sudden fluctuation in atmospheric humidity, unnoticed in the pre-flight calculations, caused a feedback loop. Sparks shot erratically across the tank's hull. A nearby steel barricade melted partially, and an arc struck the ground dangerously close to the observation team. Vogt shouted orders, and Engel moved frantically to reroute circuits. The crew inside the tank wrestled with controls, the machine thrashing as if it were alive, resisting their commands. For several tense minutes, it seemed as though the tank would destroy everything around it, both friend and foe alike. Then, with a violent shudder, the system stabilized. The Lightning tank rolled forward, unscathed, leaving a trail of destroyed vehicles in its wake. Silence fell over the snowy clearing. Soldiers and engineers stared, their breaths clouding in the freezing air, eyes wide with disbelief. "Unbelievable," Reiner whispered. It survived." Vogt nodded, though his face was pale. "And it will kill on the battlefield. But the question remains, can we control it under fire when chaos reigns? 3 days later, the tank was deployed in a field test against advancing Soviet forces near the WWII River. The battlefield was a frozen wasteland, dotted with abandoned fortifications and scarred earth. The lightning tank advanced cautiously, supported by a small contingent of infantry. As it moved, arcs of electricity danced across its hull, illuminating the snowstorm like a flickering aurora. The first encounter came suddenly. A Soviet T-34 column emerged from the fog, unaware of the weapon approaching. The lightning tank's turret glowed, and then a massive electrical discharge into the lead tank. Metal twisted, engines fried, tires vaporized, and metal frames twisted as if struck by lightning itself. Infantry charged forward, frozen with shock at the display of destructive power. But even in victory, danger lurked. The tank's energy core began to fluctuate violently, responding not only to the internal systems, but also to the atmosphere of the battlefield. Sparks leapt erratically across the tank's hull. A nearby steel barricade melted partially, and an arc struck the ground dangerously close to the observation team. Vogt shouted orders, and Engel moved frantically to reroute circuits. The crew inside the tank wrestled with controls, the machine thrashing as if it were alive, resisting their commands. For several tense minutes, it seemed as though the tank would destroy everything around it, both friend and foe alike. Then, with a violent shudder, the system stabilized. The lightning tank rolled forward, unscathed, leaving a trail of destroyed vehicles in its wake. Silence fell over the snowy clearing. Soldiers and engineers stared, their breaths clouding in the freezing air, eyes wide with disbelief. "Unbelievable," Reiner whispered. It survived." Vogt nodded, though his face was pale. "And it will kill on the battlefield. But the question remains, can we control it under fire when chaos reigns?" 3 days later, the tank was deployed in a field test against advancing Soviet forces near the WWII River. The battlefield was a frozen wasteland, dotted with abandoned fortifications and scarred earth. The lightning tank advanced cautiously, supported by a small contingent of infantry. As it moved, arcs of electricity danced across its hull, illuminating the snowstorm like a flickering aurora. The first encounter came suddenly. A Soviet T-34 column emerged from the fog, unaware of the weapon approaching. The lightning tank's turret glowed, and then a massive electrical discharge into the lead tank. Metal twisted, engines fried, tires vaporized, and metal frames twisted as if struck by lightning itself. Infantry charged forward, frozen with shock at the display of destructive power. But even in victory, danger lurked. The tank's energy core began to fluctuate violently, responding not only to the internal systems, but also to the atmosphere of the battlefield. Sparks leapt erratically across the tank's hull. A nearby steel barricade melted partially, and an arc struck the ground dangerously close to the observation team. Vogt shouted orders, and Engel moved frantically to reroute circuits. The crew inside the tank wrestled with controls, the machine thrashing as if it were alive, resisting their commands. At night, back at the mountain facility, Vogt, Engel, and Reiner gathered around the tank. The wind howled outside, rattling the reinforced doors. Engel examined his notebook, his hands shaking. "We cannot mass-produce this, not like conventional tanks. Every unit will be a nightmare to operate. And the energy core, it is unstable. If we lose control, we could destroy entire supply depots, even our own positions." Vogt's gaze lingered on the tank, now resting like a storm contained within steel. "Then we have one weapon, one miracle. The rest will be improvisation, desperation, and hope." Reiner shivered. "Hope is a dangerous thing, Oberstleutnant, especially when it rides a tank powered by lightning." Engel nodded silently, staring at the pulsing arcs that lingered faintly along the hull. Somewhere deep in the mountain, the energy core hummed, alive, restless. It seemed to sense the men watching it, aware of their fear, their awe, their fragile control. Over the next weeks, the Lightning tank saw several skirmishes, each more dangerous than the last. Stories spread among soldiers and civilians alike. A tank that moved like a phantom, striking silently in the storm, leaving destruction behind and vanishing before anyone could retaliate. Some whispered that it was possessed, that the Reich had somehow harnessed the storm itself. Others claimed it was a curse, a weapon that would bring doom as surely to Germany as to its enemies. By March 1945, the war was collapsing for the Reich. The Lightning tank remained a symbol of power and terror, yet it could not turn the tide. In one final test near the Oder River, a miscalculation in the core caused a massive discharge, leveling the surrounding forest, killing a squad of German engineers and leaving the tank itself immobilized. Vogt and Engel